my inspiration for writing Red Dirt is basically that I was in Stillwater at the right time to do it. I went to college there in the early 2000s when Ragweed and Boland and Stoney LaRue were taking off and the Great Divide was established, but they were interacting with everybody else that had started that scene. Bob Childers was very visible. Tom Skinner would show up. Randy Crouch, he would show up and just want to play an after party all night. And so I got to see all that and I got to watch that interaction. And when I was in college, I was going to be a journalist, so I worked for the O-Collegian, the paper there, and I was the sports editor. But in my free time, I would write a lot of articles like this. I would go to Red Dirt shows and write sometimes reviews, sometimes columns. And that was a lot of fun. And that sort of obviously endeared me to the artists in that scene, and some of those blossomed into friendships. Well, then, when I left college, I went off to actually be a journalist, and well, you can't cover your friends when you're in journalism. That's a conflict of interest. So I put the writing aside. Over the last 20 years of traveling around the country for different newspaper jobs, I may have written 10 articles total about music, and they were always columns, always, Skinner has died, Ragweed breaks up, those types of things that were very personal to me, I would write. But for the most part, I just laid back and just let those friendships blossom. And Cody Canada said the day that I was in the passenger seat for 20 years to Red Dirt, and he's right. And when you're in that scene, if you feel like you're a part of it, there's an urge to give something back. The artists do it via music, and I always knew I would come back somehow, some way, and tell the story of the scene, and the time just seems right. And that's why I did it. My favorite parts of the book, it was put together over 2 years, so I've got a lot, but I think a roundtable discussion with Cody Canada, Jason Boland, and Mike McClure at the 2018 Medicine Stone Festival in Cody's bus, where basically I would just give them prompts and they would talk, was absolutely magical. Just them talking about what Red Dirt is and meant to them. And there's a story that made the book about a Hammond organ falling out of the back of the truck on the Cimarron Turnpike, I believe. That's the highlight. So were the Tom Skinner stories. There's so many great ones, but my favorite one is multiple people, including Brad Piccolo of the Red Dirt Rangers, told a story of him getting bounced out of Canes for being a bit of a problem, and I thought it was hilarious, and so did everybody else. And then getting the Texas artists, the Randy Rogers and Wade Bowen, and both Reckless Kelly and the Motor Cars, and Jamie Lynn Wilson, just to open up and talk about their relationships with Red Dirt, really helped drive home how this scene that started in Stillwater can now be viewed basically interchangeably with Texas music. And it was because of all these relationships these artists built. And I think my last favorite part was the introduction from BJ Barham of American Aquarium, who had he's from Raleigh, North Carolina, and he talks at great length in the introduction about how a couple of nice gestures from Canada and the Turnpike Troubadours set him and his band on a course to conquer Texas. And the line he said was, we're a Raleigh, North Carolina band paying our bills in Texas and Oklahoma. And I just thought that was great. Those were the biggest highlights. And that's not even getting into the fact that Garth Brooks gave some of his time to this book and lent in his memories of the scene. But aside from the interview, which was just great, it was 15 minutes of the classic impression you get of Garth, where he's just almost makes you feel, as the person doing the interview, that he's excited to be talking to you. You could hear in his voice when he mentioned Childers or Greg Jacobs, his eyes were lighting up. But also I knew when he was on board, I knew this book was a good idea. There were quite a bit of pitches that I made to agents and publishers, and even the ones that were on board didn't understand Red Dirt, and so there was always this is too niche, can I sell this? When I saw how quickly Garth was on board to not just tell his story but talk about the people in the scene, I knew instantly that this was going to be something that people in Oklahoma and the surrounding scenes wanted to hear. So that's what that part did for me. The hardest parts of the book, reliving the plane crash. Now, I was the sports editor when the Oklahoma State plane crash happened, but I basically experienced it through music. There's a little bit I get into it in the book where I, and the Tulsa World wrote about this. I had asked to join the team for a couple of basketball games that season, and the one that I pushed the hardest for was that Colorado game when the plane crashed. But a week or 10 days before, I realized that there were some Red Dirt concerts in town. Basically, that means Ragweed was playing at the Wormy Dog Saloon, and I just went, well, I'm going to do that. So I don't know, how much of that was actually a near miss, but reliving all that was really hard because we all experienced it as cowboys, as just part of the community more than anything else, and we just happened to experience it while there was supposed to be a concert going on. Lights were out, TVs were on, everybody was crying in the bar, and so for better or worse, for all the responsibility I had to the paper, the way I went through it was via Red Dirt music, and that changed a lot of my relationships, and I really haven't talked at all about that in the 20 years since it's happened, and I can't believe it's been that long. So that was the hardest. And the other part of the book that was just really tough was being fair to the Turnpike Troubadours, because they didn't ask for me to write this book at this time, and they were so gracious as a full band to be on board. And that was about 9 months before they took their hiatus. So I got one of the last, here we are all together as this band that's conquering not just Red Dirt, but Americana and beyond, and doing it their way. And it was such a great story to tell, and figuring out how to do that in the context of their last year is probably what kept the book from being out in 2019. I just didn't feel that I could honestly tell the story of Red Dirt without talking about Turnpike's contribution. But I didn't feel like I could talk about Turnpike's contribution without finding a way to be honest about where they are without being tabloidish. I didn't want the book to be salacious. I wanted it to be, about the music and the artists. That was really hard. My hopes for the book, I hope it opens the door for a lot more stories from this scene, whether it's more books, or maybe there'll be a documentary one day. I know there's other writers out there, and one of them, John Woolley, formerly of The World, might have been one of the first was one of the first to reference the scene as Red Dirt in print, and I think that's really cool as a journalist, just to know the person, or to know who the person is that helped that go mainstream. But I think there's other people too that have some experience and want to get their thoughts on Red Dirt down on paper, or in a picture somewhere, that aren't musicians. And I hope this shows a path for folks to do that. And also generally, I just hope people understand more about the origins of Red Dirt and where it came from, and then also how a scene as wide and diverse as Texas could accept it. And for a music scene that is based so much on pride, and state pride, regional pride, to accept Red Dirt as part of that scene, that's a really cool story too, and I'm really, really, really proud of that being such a big component to the book. My last thing, it's here. It's out on September 19th. You can pre-order it at book.com, digitally or the electronic version. And at that site, we've put some package deals together where you can make donations to the Red Dirt Relief Fund, or order another package with some goodies like these stickers and some bonus material. I hope it's great fun, and I've had a blast doing it, and it's certainly been a great experience, and to do it during this pandemic when my day job is at the New York Times, when we have a lot to cover and a lot of ground to get through every day. To be able to still find time to tell this story has been a great struggle for me, but it's worked out in a weird way that the last 4 months have given me the time to do it.